Thought I'd do a quick walkthrough of this 6G74 Mivec timing belt because it's sort of a rare one and people don't get to see it very much. This was a complicated job. It had a lot of little steps, and the order of operations is critical. Since I haven't done it before, I'm not really familiar. I'll give you a couple examples of what made this difficult. So this is a horizontally mounted V6 engine. Radiator has to come out to make clearance to get the gun in here, or the tool. I use a special tool in this case to get the crank pulley off. This engine has this timing belt cover, two pieces, one here, and then a lower cover behind the pulley. In order to get that off, you need to take this diagonal brace off, which is quite large. This houses the power steering pump up here. This looks like a water pump, but it's called a fan bearing. All it is a single bearing with a pulley on it. Down here, the air conditioner bracket sandwiches in here. So to get this piece off, to get to the timing belt, you have to take the air conditioner compressor off, as well as the air conditioner compressor bracket, which is kind of a bear. Luckily this car isn't rusty or anything, so everything came off. It was just tricky to figure out what had to come off. On the other side here, the alternator has to come off because it too grasps around that aluminum brace that goes up and down. During this timing belt job, I also did the water pump, which is here. It's a funny water pump because the water pump has a separate back half which goes into the V of the engine and mates to an O-ring on a pipe. So there's an O-ring up here, like you see in most Mitsubishis. It's a large O-ring. It looks like a 4G63 O-ring, and then there's a little one. It's a 15.9 millimeter O-ring behind that. So it's very hard to get that half off once I had everything off. And then you see the way this mates together. This piece attached to the face of the water pump, which extends up, and then this piece goes down. So to start, you have to take these bolts out up here, and there's this little one that you can't even get a wrench on back here, and you can't reach from the top because the pipe's in the way. So in this face, these all have gaskets, of course, in between them. So that was a little bit tricky. The belt itself was quite easy to do once the water pump was replaced. So what we're looking at now is as far as this engine will go back together before I put new spark plugs and new valve cover gaskets on. The reason I can't put the cover back on is because if you put the valve cover gasket back on, you can't reach these valve cover bolts. I'm sorry, if you put the valve covers back on, you can't reach these bolts. Also, these the crank sensor and the cam sensor for the Mivec are captured in the timing belt cover, so we'll just leave that be now. A couple other things to point out while we're in here. The timing belt marks are different than the other engines a little bit. They're cast in, this is a weird angle, but they're cast into the backside of the valve covers. Another thing on these engines to look out for is this is the actuator for the dual runner manifold. When I got the car, I had no idea, but the actuator was broken and I was only getting half the runners to open at high throttle. So mega down on power. We repaired that. This is only available with the manifold assembly, which is a bummer. So we TIG welded it back together, and now it's working again. So another couple things that are interesting to point out, like the BMW M3, the S14 engine, this has tiny holes for the spark plugs, and it takes a 5/8 wrench, but a 5/8 wrench doesn't fit in there, so now I have to order a special tool for that. It's coil on plug. One of the coil, the plugs is actually stuck in here and it came off the coil. It's not broken, it just unplugged, so I have to gently get that out. I'm going to let it soak for a bit. To take the valve cover off on this side, you need to take the support for the transmission check dipstick, the oil dipstick, and some bracketry. Then this should come off no problem. It's the other side that's quite tricky. To get the other side off, you need to take all the wiring off the top, the vacuum lines here, on the solenoid here, this breather pot, which is kind of cool. The car comes with a breather, air cleaner, and all this stuff here. This is the protector for the throttle linkage. Everything you'd normally have to take off, because this whole manifold has to come off to get to the spark plug. So you can imagine they've never been done. Also, this brace here has to come off, and we can see back here that the valve cover gasket is leaking, so it's time to do that also. It's a major while you're in there job. Initially, I was just going to do the timing belt, but so you'd have to take this brace off to get these covers off the top to do the valve cover gasket, so you might as well do that. And then when the manifold's off, you can't see it, but the knock sensor is on a bracket deep in there between the two V's. You might as well do that with it off. You don't want to take this back off again. It's a 3-hour job or so to get this thing round trip. So that's where we're at. I won't point out too many of the other differences in this video, but I just wanted to show people what we're working with here. Thanks.